Dizod 500 presents Canadian Elections of History. The second election in Canadian history took place between the 20th of July and the 12th of October, 1872. It was the first election to be held 5 years after the previous one, which is something that, as of 2007, cannot physically happen anymore. Incumbent Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald, representing the Liberal Conservative Party, is feeling really good about his chances of winning this election because he's been pretty popular within the first Canadian Parliament. George Brown, the unofficial leader of the Liberal Party, was, unofficial, so he didn't technically step down so much as he just didn't consider himself leader anymore. He was replaced unofficially, of course, by Edward Blake, the former Premier of Ontario who had resigned to take up this post. However, he was very, very ill, and it was actually Alexander Mackenzie who was really leading the Liberal campaign. Well, how much of there was, anyways. See, by 1872, campaigning still wasn't really, a thing that happens every day. You wouldn't expect a candidate to campaign around the country. And so Alexander Mackenzie didn't. He only stuck to campaigning in Ontario, which actually makes sense, considering that the other provinces were probably going to vote for the Liberals in wide margins, and he just had to worry about Ontario, which, historically goes conservative, at least Liberal conservative, and the conservative mixture, at least last time, and projections show that it will go that way as well. Following their admission into Confederation, this was the first election to include members of Parliament from the provinces of Manitoba and British Columbia. However, Manitoba would only elect 4 members, and British Columbia would only elect 6. Almost immediately after the last election, the Anti-Confederation Party, formerly led by Joseph Howe, just disappeared. Confederation had already happened. There was no need in opposing it. So they had a couple of by-elections to determine the rest of the seats, mostly going in favor of the Liberal Party. However, it wasn't all over for the Anti-Confederation Party, because there was still some semblance of the party in Newfoundland, and they actually won a majority of the seats in the 1869 Newfoundland general election. Now, why did they have an anti-Confederation party? Was because their rivals, the Conservative Party, was pro-Confederation. This basically asserted the fact that people from Newfoundland did not want to become Canadians, at least not yet. You're probably already familiar with Sir John A. Macdonald, the first Canadian Prime Minister who served in that role literally since Confederation. But his opponent, Edward Blake, is much more interesting. First off, he's not the official leader, of course, as I mentioned earlier, but he's also running in 2 seats. He's running for the seat of Bruce South and also Durham West. However, the Durham West riding was by acclamation. So basically, there was no opponent to when he was running in 1872 in this election. So he actually, since he won both seats, he decided to turn down the offer of Durham West and just run and sit for Bruce South in the Parliament. Before we get into the election, we should specify that although most of the ridings in this election elected just 1 member, obviously, through the system first past the post, but there were some exceptions. The ridings of Ottawa, Victoria, the city and county of St. John, Cape Breton, Pictou, Hamilton, and Halifax, which elected 2 members, with each voter casting up to 2 votes. This system is called plurality block voting. Well, here are the results. 70.3% of Canadians voted in this election, which is actually just about 3% less than it was at the last election. The winner of this election got 38.7% of the vote, or 123,100 votes, and they won 100 seats, not quite a majority. 101 seats were needed for a majority. But who would it be? Well, it would be the MP for Kingston, the incumbent Prime Minister, Sir John Alexander Macdonald, who won re-election. Edward Blake, though, won a staggering 94 seats, only 6 away from unseating Sir John A. Macdonald. Sir John A. Macdonald would go into coalition with conservative independents who would prop up the government until later. This election produced the country's very first minority government, and the country basically didn't know how to react to a party not getting more than half the seats in the parliament. Of course, it was still propped up, but still, it was kind of weird not seeing a majority government. It didn't matter though, because just 2 years later, it would come out that Macdonald had been doing something shady during this election. And I'll see you guys for the next remastered election.